All right. As Adrian said, my name is Jay Calderin, and I've been involved in the arts and fashion for over 40 years in many different capacities. But first and foremost, I consider myself a teacher. I love teaching. In the end, there's nothing more rewarding for me. And I found to be an effective educator, I also need to be a dedicated lifelong learner. I need to be curious, willing to learn new things, and brave enough to experiment. Because in the end, I always want to share that with my students. And this is me at the School of Fashion Design, but I also teach at Mass Art and the Museum of Fine Arts. So fashion envelope number 3, which is on exhibit, is one of those experiments. This is the final piece right here. It's a reversible body wrap. And what I'd like to share with you tonight is the process involved in creating it. So it starts with some very basic ways of wrapping the body. So here we're going back to ancient Egypt. Just so that you know, of the courses I teach, a lot of them are involved with this process. So I teach fashion history. So, this is where I get a lot of inspiration. And for a long time, the most valuable element of a garment was the actual textile. So it was rarely cut into it. Like you wouldn't cut an armhole into it. You would instead, with rectangular cuts of fabric were gathered, tucked, pleated, folded, draped, and belted in order to conform to the body. And here's some examples of some of those really basic fundamental garments. And I met an incredible designer, Carla Fernandez. She is a contemporary Mexican designer. I met her in 2007 when I attended a workshop she was hosting at Harvard. She discussed how indigenous people use squares and rectangles to fashion all sorts of clothing. And these were from an actual visit because she actually had a wonderful exhibit also at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. These are from a much later workshop that she had. So I was also inspired by how designers have taken these rudimentary shapes to make fashion. Here are some examples of work by Ralph Rucci, Madeleine Vionnet, and Madame Gray, and also the 1920s cocoon silhouette. All of this kind of pointed me in the direction of what I wanted to do with this project. So I started with a little origami, playing with paper to craft my envelope, so to speak. My goal was to create a garment using zero waste pattern making. Now, there are many designers concerned with waste in the fashion industry who employ this technique, creating pattern pieces that interlock like a puzzle. And here's just an example of one designer, and and all of these pieces interlock. Again, I started in miniature with paper, this time doing something that's usually at the end of the design process, which is creating a marker where you fit all the pattern pieces on a fabric. And this time I was planning it in advance, like how would I place these pieces so that we wouldn't waste anything. The measurements of the actual fabric, what informed the design as well as the size and shape of the pattern pieces. One of my major concerns was how to build in seam allowance, which was, again, something that I had to account for when I was designing the actual fabric. And then in theory, this garment, after it's stitched, could be unstitched and refashioned, which is what happened with a lot of garments throughout early history, where, again, it was all about preserving the fabrics. And I decided to take the idea of zero waste a step further. And here you see these feed sacks from the 1930s during the Depression era. And they were often printed with patterns so that women can use the fabric to create dresses. And one of the things that really caught my attention was that they also printed toys that you could cut out and sew together and stuff and have a toy for your child. And after all of these ideas started to gel, I felt like I was ready to start to explore the actual digital design. So I took to Adobe Illustrator and started to plan out what I was going to do. And I used a digital print-on-demand service called Spoonflower because our students use this service. And a lot of all of what I'm doing throughout any of the experiments that I kind of take on is about teaching after the fact. I selected a satin because I wanted the muted color palette to sort of shimmer. And then this is the design of the fabric. So this represents 4 yards of continuous fabric that has all the pattern pieces and the print in those pattern pieces designed into it. So the surface design, I started off being inspired by Paisley. I wanted to create a bold graphic version of Paisley. So I designed this piece of Paisley that, and I wanted to use it and its components to create meaningful symbols that would cover every inch of the fabric. This is actually the Celtic symbol for mother. And this particular project, all of the symbols were inspired by my mom. The first was the fish, because my mother's astrological sign is Pisces. Then this was the graphic representation using that original design I showed earlier. And then this is one of the sections. This is actually the collar section that incorporates that Paisley into it. And then butterflies. And this is, again, what the design turned out to be, again, using the actual fish in different positions and putting that core to create the butterfly. And then I also, as you see in this piece, this is another piece, this is the outer part of the garment. I also incorporated an original stripe and a plaid. And then the last symbol is the peony bud. And this is that representation. And here is it on the inside of the garment. This is what you find inside. And then I started to play. I sort of got on a roll and started to play with all sorts of decorative details and different types of fabrics that would be put into the mix. These, for example, are the cuffs. And then these folded in half lengthwise would be the ties for the garment. So here we see the garment again. And I knew that what would be really important and really make it beautiful when all this work is put together would be to see how it would drape on the body, especially on the bias. And when it was tied, when it was controlled by gathering, as we see in the tie, the cuffs and the collar here. Okay. For the purpose of the presentations, I also had sections of the design printed on canvases so that they could act like a key to the whole design so that you could see what every piece is before it's sculpted, onto the body. And finally, I continue with the design for, for the postcards and for all sorts of promotion. And I believe that, the process provides context. The process for fashion envelope number 3 allowed me to weave together elements of art, of history, of design, of technology, and also personal meaning into what otherwise is a rather simple garment. It also provides me with the tools to teach what I've learned. So that has been my process for this particular garment. And that's all for me.
Jay, I'm gonna ask a couple questions.
Sure.
And thank you very much for. We can maybe jump back to one of the images if you want to show the
sure.
garment. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Wonderful description, and this piece really does show how elaborate the surface design can become, as well as these gathers and the sculpting of the fabric onto the body. You were talking about your mom as an inspiration. Does this mean that your mom gets to model this envelope number 3?
We will see. We'll see if she loved it in the picture. I actually showed her the day before the exhibit because I wanted it to be a little bit of a surprise. And she loved all the separate patterns and the picture of the garment.
I also enjoy this interaction that you've been having with your students along the way, maybe sharing with them some of your in-process work. At what point in time did you begin this piece, and when did you start to share it with your students to help them understand, what stages you were going through towards the finish line?
Well, that part I haven't done yet. But what I usually do is I kind of take these as my own professional development, these projects that I take on every once in a while. And like you've seen, I kind of tried to document the process and thinking about what I already do in the classroom and how this could be a part of it. Like as I said earlier, I teach digital design using Photoshop and Illustrator so that they can create illustrations, but they also design original fabrics. But with more and more students and just the industry in general thinking about sustainability and experimenting with zero waste, I hadn't seen really anyone doing the zero waste surface design, so that, and I think you can do this in a lot of different ways. I did it in a very simple sort of using that concept of square and rectangles, but it can be, much more elaborate pattern pieces that you could do with this. So that's kind of my goal, and I'm hoping to make a sort of zero waste challenge for my students when they design their fabrics.
That's wonderful. I look forward to a live draping session to see how this zero waste rectangle drapes onto the body and it becomes its three-dimensional fashion. So as an addition to this collection of process work, that would be great to see a sort of a step-by-step draping of this piece. At this point, I'm going to open up questions to a few questions. Does anybody have any questions for Jay?
Oops.
Jay, how long did it take you to make this piece from the beginning to the end?
I think if you add it, I mean, it wasn't all continuous. There are a lot of breaks in between, but I think maybe, time designing on the computer and actual construction, maybe about 2 weeks, because again, it was a lot of figuring it out. So it was some trial and error. So
Great, 2 weeks.
if you don't count all the years of
Yes.
training experience, that all informed.
Jay, are you self-taught with the zero waste, or how did you learn this?
Mostly reading and and seeing what other designers were doing in zero waste.
That's great. Jay, thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to move to our next presenter, who's Laura. And this has been a great chance to have an introduction to the process and the final design. Thank you very much.